This is DJ Chuang, and I'm here with Professor Daniel Wong, who is a preaching professor up at Tyndale in, is it Toronto, Canada?
Yes, Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Fantastic. And then he recently did a workshop or seminar in the Bay Area on Asian American preaching. So we wanted to take a couple minutes to chat with him about that. So tell us about your background in teaching and learning about preaching in a diverse context, and then speak to the Asian American context.
Yes, well, I've been doing teaching and preaching since 97 here at Tyndale University College, and I would say just based on just my experience of growing up in like a Chinese church and various different contexts, the audience or congregation has always been very prominent to me. In fact, I wrote my Doctor of Ministry related to the feedback, preaching feedback in terms of application and preaching. So, that was in 1989. And so, I've been thinking about this quite a bit in terms of particularly congregation and settings and what the preacher needs to be thinking about and doing in relationship to the congregation, whatever setting it is in.
Fantastic. Please continue. So what's unique about the Asian American context that you've found?
Well, I think you have been discussing this whole idea about Asian American worship and whether it's rather generic or whether it's specific. And I think somebody was saying that it was a subdued white worship that was going on in some of our Asian American contexts. So I would say that first that the Asian American settings is the majority are of Asian American backgrounds, and I think that makes a difference in terms of the way their backgrounds, their history, their marginality, how they come about it. And I also want to just propose that Asian American preaching can also have to do with Asian American preachers, as we come to a congregation with all of our backgrounds and all of our baggage that we bring. And so I think there's a number of dynamics that are going on in what we would call Asian American preaching regarding the congregation and the diversity within it, as well as what's going on in the preacher.
Well, very good. You've spoken about the context and the people, both the preacher and the congregation. Can you give a specific example that would be different than the mainstream, mostly white culture?
Right. First of all, I think what I did in the workshop was I focused a little bit more on what we call Americanized Asian Americans. That's what Ken Fong brings out. And so it's mostly like the English settings as opposed to like first generation. And a number of the preaching books have talked about that. But some of the topics that we might focus on in these type of settings, such as more the grace of God, the acceptance of God, these type of things would be, even though they might be discussed in other settings, I think they are particularly prominent in our Asian American settings because it addresses some of the good and the bad in some of our cultural heritage. So I would say some things have to do with the topics, maybe have to do with the approaches as well. I sense that our preaching needs to be a lot more encouraging and affirming because what we often from parents and from the older generation tends to be more shame-based, comparing with others what we haven't done well, that we still need to achieve. The illustration I always use is if you bring a 95 home on exam, what's the first thing that your parents say? They always say, where's the other 5%? They always say, you need to achieve more, to do better. And they think that they're going to encourage us through that. But I think for the most part, many of us are discouraged because we haven't been affirmed in how far we've gone. And so I would say sometimes our approach in preaching, as opposed to being much more, shame-based of how far we need to go, I think we can also approach a little bit of how far we have gone and how far we can go with God's strength.
Fantastic. And then after the workshop, you launched a blog and a website to continue this conversation?
Right, just putting up my outline, putting up the points that I had, and hopefully other people can respond to that as well. So that's on my website under Asian American preaching.
Very good.
A
And we'll
number of
provide a
questions also.
link to that with this video.
Great. Good. And I think there's a number of questions arose and contributions arose. I think some of the things that you mentioned already, such as what's different about this preaching as opposed to there. I did a couple of checks or emails with Ken Fong and Dave Gibbons, and some of the things that they said had to do with the topics. Also, some of the concerns about multi-generational, and I think there's another concern there. But both of them said, to address specific areas or issues about that Asian Americans face would make it very specific for Asian American preaching.
Well, very good.
So, some of the questions that arose, again, like what is Asian American preaching? How does it differ? But, and how can we best prepare for that in our diverse contexts?
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you for kicking off that conversation and
Great.
providing a place to continue that, and we'll continue online.
Great.
And this video could be a good starting point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor.